back to Cindy's library, and today we are going to do another Tolkien talk. This time on Smith by Wooton Major. This is the edition that was edited by Verlin Flieger, so this is the Scholar's edition with everything in it, including, let's see, where is it? Once again, Pauline Baines did illustrations. And as you can see, they are, as always, gorgeous. And they included them, which is a wonderful thing. But Smith of Wooton Major. This was the last thing that Tolkien ever wrote in his life that was published during his lifetime. It's interesting how it got started. It all started with a request for him to write an introduction to a new edition of The Golden Key by George MacDonald. And interestingly enough, now you have to remember, this was in Tolkien's phase where he was a bit more grumpy overall, and well, he had had a lot of years to think about what he thought about fairy stories and about the location fairy, and he had his opinions on them. And so the more he wrote about the Golden Key, the more he realized that much of as he may have liked it in his younger years, and much as it was influential, and George MacDonald, more broadly speaking, was highly influential to C.S. Lewis, he decided he didn't like it so much. And so what did he do? He started writing down exactly the type of story he thought would be a real fairy tale, and Smith of Wooton Major is the result. So that is the background, basically, for this. I suppose in some ways it's just as well that the things changed with the publisher, etc., and so forth, and the edition never came out as originally planned, and Tolkien's part was dropped. Maybe that was just as well under the circumstances, but we got Smith of Wooton Major out of it, which is a very good thing. So, what to say about the story itself? Smith of Wooton Major is about this town, Wooton Major, and its inhabitants. And they have this custom where I think it's every 24 years they have a special children's party with a special cake made by the master cook. And only 24 children are invited. And this is supposed to be the pinnacle of what the master cook of the time can create, and he'll be known for what he does at this event. And yeah, so this is a pretty big deal. It's rare that a master cook ever gets to do more than one cake for these special children's days. Anyway, we have the cook who comes up with the idea of doing something that looks very fairy-like, including a tiny little fairy queen on top. And we have the cook's assistant, Alf, who doesn't approve of it, although he does say they should include a star in the old master cook's spice box to be included with other little prizes like coins and such for the children. And it's also Alf that actually ends up doing most of the work for this case. For this cake, I should say. Anyway, the star ends up being eaten by one of the little boys at this party, whose name is basically Smith throughout the story. And Smith, eventually, the star comes out of him, and nothing's vulgar about that. And he puts it on his forehead, and the star basically gives him a passport into the lands of fairy. Now, the star basically says he has the Fairy King's permission to be there, and so for the most part he is left alone by those that might otherwise bother him, but that still doesn't mean that the land of fairy is not a perilous place for him to be in, and he has a number of adventures, including especially with the wild wind and the birch tree. Or is it a beech tree? The birch tree. The birch tree. Anyway, so he has a number of adventures in fairy. In the meantime, time passes on, he grows up, he gets married, he has children, his children grow up, and eventually there comes the day when he needs to give up the star. After all, it's not originally his to begin with. And there's a whole matter of Alf and Nooks. I won't spoil anything about that part since that is particularly delicious. But probably have to say the episode with the wild wind and the birch is probably my favorite. It's very tragic and very moving, and it shows exactly how dangerous fairy is for mortals who are unwary, or even those who, like Smith, know a little bit, but still they don't really belong and don't really know what they are doing. In fact, there's one part in here. Let's see if I can find it. No. He sees many things. He sees many things, but he has no idea what's really going on here. Describes a number of scenes, and he has no idea the history that led to that scene or its significance. And he's not meant to. We are not meant to. We are never told. That's kind of the point. Tolkien himself called Smith of Wooton Major an old man's tale. And it is that. And yet there is still so much to delight in it. If you haven't read it yet, I can highly recommend it for lovers of fantasy, and especially if you are lovers of J.R.R. Tolkien. It's probably what he would have considered the pinnacle of a fairy story out of his works. He wrote many things. The Silmarillion, of course, was a whole mythology. Lord of the Rings was an epic romance, in the old sense of the word romance. And The Hobbit was a fairy story too, but Tolkien became dissatisfied, which is a pity because it has so much charm. But yes, Tolkien probably would have said this is what he thinks a fairy story should be. This feeling and mood that Myth of Wooton Major evokes. Of mystery that we mortals are never really supposed to know. Anyway, that is what I have to say for this Tolkien talk. Thank you very, very much for stopping by. I truly appreciate it. If you have read Myth of Wooton Major by J.R.R. Tolkien, or if this inspires you to read it, I'd love to hear about it in your comments. And so, until next time, I hope we all stay healthy and safe, and as always, happy reading!